welcome to the Ninjababes podcast. My name is Kara Mack, and I'm here with Amy Harski. What's up, Amy? It's so good to have you on the podcast today. Welcome.
Hey, I'm excited to be here. Two of my favorite topics, pregnancy and ninja.
Yes. You led the way right into what we're talking about today. Pregnancy and ninja.
Oh, sorry. Spoiler.
No, perfect. Spoiler. It's only like a 5-second spoiler because I was about to say it. But no, that's awesome. So we'll explain a little bit more of what our topic is. But if right away you're listening and you're like, pregnancy and ninja, I don't need that. Wait, don't click off. Because chances are you might know someone who is pregnant or who was pregnant and is now a mom getting back into ninja, or any type of situation, like 1 degree of separation, you probably know someone who is or was pregnant and who is a ninja. Or maybe in the future you would like to be a mom yourself or want to have kids in the future. And, so this topic is applicable to those who are pregnant right now or who are in postpartum, but it's really applicable to anyone who would care to know what that population is going through and, want to be their friends. Maybe you're their sister or their brother or, so you're probably related somehow. So the point is that this is still applicable. But I will also say, if you are a teen or a younger kid listening and you're not so sure about this topic, we are going to be talking about a few things that might be better to listen to with a parent or just with like a older sibling or someone else who might be able to help you talk through some of these things. We will be talking about a little bit of stuff that might feel a little bit like medically graphic a little. And so I just want to put that disclaimer out there for people who might not know what they're getting themselves in for in this episode. But we're going to talk all about just what does it look like training, in ninja or really athletics in general, if you're pregnant, and then postpartum, how can you get back into it? And I have an amazing expert with me here, Amy Harski. And so Amy, I know we're going to talk about so many things, and this episode is probably going to turn into 2 or maybe even 3 episodes, but would you just go ahead and introduce yourself and we'll kind of just get started with who you are?
Yeah, so my name's Amy Harski. Right now I'm a mom and a pregnancy and postpartum coach. And so I work predominantly with athletes that are looking to stay fit during pregnancy and get back to their sport postpartum. And so I actually didn't get into ninja until after having kids. So I got into it after my first. And I did season 11 at 1.5 years postpartum, and then season 13 at 10 months postpartum with my second. So I've gone through this myself.
Yeah.
And then as far as just what got me into the pregnancy and fitness, I was a gymnast growing up. I pole vaulted all through college. And then I kind of had a break where I just worked out, and I worked as a trainer for about 10 years in different aspects of the fitness industry. And then I got pregnant with my first, and I started working out, and I realized I knew nothing about working out while you're pregnant, even though I had worked for 10 years in this industry. And I found that as I was doing things, I'd keep questioning, like, is this a good idea? Should I be doing this? Is this a bad idea? I don't know. And then after I had my first son about 4 years ago, I did run into some issues postpartum. So I had a mild diastasis. So I was kind of afraid to do anything with my abs because I heard you shouldn't do crunches. And I had, as I got into like more sprinting and jumping, I found that I had some leakage. And so I started learning about these topics, and I spent a lot of time educating myself and kind of working through my own issues. And then I got pregnant with my second. And even though he was my second baby and he was a huge baby, he was 9.5 pounds.
Oh, wow.
I felt better working out that pregnancy just because I felt more confident in my choices. And then postpartum, I started my rehab really early, and I was able to progress to a much higher level of strength much earlier on than I did with my first. And so now I'm kind of passionate about sharing that knowledge with other women so that they know how to navigate their pregnancies confidently.
Yeah. Yeah, that was a beautiful intro. Okay. Before we jump in anymore, like, I think it's so key, everything that we're talking about, because I, in the past, like, have been one of those girls who's like, oh no, like, when I get pregnant, I just have to stop ninja and stop anything fitness related. And like, there's, there could be varying degrees of like how your pregnancies go. For some people, they do end up needing to stop completely. But I think it was this fear of like, okay, well, once I'm pregnant, like that's the end, like no more athletics forever. Like, and that's not exactly the way it has to be. So it's just all these conversations that we've had even prior to recording have been very eye-opening for me. And I think there's a lot of moms across the fitness industry who are realizing like, okay, there is a lot we can safely do during pregnancy and then postpartum as we acclimate back into it. But before we even get into all that, could you explain what were the certifications that you had gotten when you were learning and researching and like getting into this whole topic?
Yeah, so the ones that I have are one, it's through Girls Gone Strong. It's called Certified Pregnancy and Postpartum Coach, I think. That might not be the right acronym. And then I also have one that's a pregnancy and postpartum corrective exercise specialist. And then I've done a couple of courses specifically on training female athletes. It's called Training the Female Athlete, Level 1 and Level 2. Cool. So those are kind of the main pregnancy ones. And then I'm a nerd, so I read lots of research.
Yeah. No, it's great. I love it. Yeah. Okay. So where should we start? So let's jump in. But yeah, why don't you lead the way? What is kind of the first thing that you want to talk about when we're tackling this topic?
So I don't know if we want to talk about first maybe some of the fears that you were talking about with women and pregnancy, because that was definitely something that I had as well before I was getting pregnant. Is I felt like I had to do all of these athletic things first because once you have a baby, then you're done competing. And I think that we're seeing more and more that that's not the case. It's really cool to see, like, I don't know if you know the gymnast Chelsea Memel, I think is how you say her name, that came back after having 2 kids, or watching like Allison Felix at the Olympics. And so it's really awesome to see more of these moms now coming back in their sports after having a kid or several kids. And it's not to say it's super easy, but I think with the right education, then we can do a lot better job of building ourselves back up. Yeah.
So you might know this more specifically than I do, but I think when I was younger, especially, I always just thought that it just wasn't very safe to be like doing strength training or like doing high intensity stuff while you were pregnant. But what kind of is that, or is there like a myth aspect to that?
There is to some extent. And so overwhelmingly what we've seen through the research is that working out while you're pregnant is really beneficial to both mother and baby. So it's going to reduce your risk of gestational diabetes, excessive weight gain. It helps with perinatal mood disorders. I mean, just about anything you can list off, it's good for. So exercising throughout pregnancy, you should absolutely do it. Unless there's a few specific conditions where it's contraindicated, but your doctor would be telling you if you had something where you shouldn't be working out. And then this idea that you shouldn't lift weights, we have a lot more women lifting heavier during pregnancy. There's still not like a ton of research on the really heavy type of strength training that we might see athletes do. And I do personally scale people back from like maximal loads when they're pregnant. But you can absolutely continue strength training. You can continue doing cardio. HIIT, so super, super high intensity. If you're over like 90% of your VO2 max, we do see like transient changes in the baby's heartbeat. Obviously, that's in research conditions. And so you shouldn't be doing things where you're just going like completely all out, like 100% max effort. But pretty much as long as you're staying at kind of like an 8 out of 10, then you're totally fine.
Yeah, and I think, again, to just like emphasize the fact that definitely everyone's situation, I'm sure, is different. And it would definitely be wise to be checking in with a doctor on all these things. But also, I think it's becoming more and more prevalent for people like yourself to have specialties in training for this population. And so I think if you're able to find someone in your local gym area or whatever who really knows what they're talking about when it comes to like doing this type of training while you're pregnant, I think that would be absolutely key and like really cool.
Yeah, it's nice to have guidance because it kind of gives you that little bit of reassurance that like, okay, yeah, what I'm doing is okay.
Yeah. Yes. So some of the things that I've also wondered is like, what's the difference between just getting pregnant and then feeling like, okay, well, I just you know, like the mindset shift of like, I just shouldn't be doing any of this anymore because pretty soon I'm going to be taking care of a baby and like I'm not even going to have time to work out. So just like forget it. Like I shouldn't even be doing any of this. Like I know it can be really challenging to find that balance for new moms or any mom of just taking care of your kids and then also taking care of yourself. But do you, like, I'm sure every mom has a different answer to this question, but how do you feel like that balance comes in? And like when it comes to getting back into working out, I'm sure there's got to be like a careful balance of like, how do we get back into it and how do we balance like taking care of our child also?
Yeah, so from a time aspect, it's definitely one of those things that you have to decide that it's a priority. So once the baby's out, you know, a lot of maybe activities that you had time beforehand, you know, some stuff's going to be off your plate because it is a lot of work caring for a little baby. And if you're not getting much sleep, maybe your intensity or time for workouts also, you just don't feel up to it. But the things that I found most helpful for me and for moms that I work with, so a big one is asking for help. I think a lot of times we as women are hesitant to ask for help. We're hesitant to take the time to take care of ourselves. But like sitting and talking with your husband or your significant other or even family members and being like, hey, can you help support me in this and watch the baby, you know, a couple times a week so I can go do my workout. And I think a lot of times that's an option. We're just afraid to ask for it. And then I think another big part of it is sort of changing your mentality around like what a good workout is. Because a lot of times, you know, before you have a kid, you could go to the gym, maybe you'll do a 2-hour workout. And a lot of times that's just not practical. So a lot of my stuff is done from home. And a lot of times you have to accept that maybe I get 15 minutes in and then the baby wakes up. But that something is better than nothing. And so getting rid of this sort of like perfectionist mindset of my workout needs to look like this and being like, hey, that's awesome. I got something done today. And then just really prioritizing what it is you're trying to do. So initially my biggest focus was just building strength back. And, you know, say like today is my upper body pull day. So if I even get a couple sets of pull-ups, then that's good. And if I get something else, great. But at least I did that.
Yeah, I think that mentality piece is so key because, you know, I'm not a mom yet, but I can, again, speaking from like that place of like worry as like a pre-mom or whatever you want to call me.
Yeah,
it's
looking
like,
forward in the future.
Yeah, thinking about the future, it's like, yeah, it just feels like this daunting mountain of like, okay, well, it's not going to be the same. It's like that anxiety of like, well, how will it be different? Is it going to be like how I hear like my one friend's life goes where she seems like she has no free time? Or is it going to be like my other friend over here who's somehow like, you know, I'm going to pick on Lindsay for a second, like got on American Ninja Warrior after like giving birth
3 months,
months ago. Yeah. So like, you know, what extreme are we looking at? And obviously like, everyone's situation is different. I'm not trying to like make anyone feel bad about their own situation if they have a lot of challenges, because I know we're going to talk about some of these challenges that can happen postpartum, but it's like I lost my train of thought.
No worries. We can edit.
But yeah, just that worry of like, how will it be different? And so yeah, I guess my mentality needs to be a bit more open-minded of like, I have to take it as it comes, see how I'm feeling, see what life is like, and be able to reprioritize goals or just have new expectations of like what a workout might look like.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times pregnancy is good practice for that because, again, there's so much that's out of your control. And so you have to learn to sort of, you know, accept how things are and adjust where you can adjust. Because my biggest thing with like pregnant women and new moms is focusing on what you can control. So like first trimester, if you're, you know, visiting the toilet every couple hours, or you're feeling super nauseous and you're really tired, you know, you can't focus on what your workout used to look like. You know, you have to go, okay, I don't feel great today. I'm going to do some gentle stretching. And that's a win. It taught me a lot of lessons. I'm very much a controller. I had to learn you don't get to control anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say something else that we had talked about earlier was just like that mentality of thinking about like short-term goals versus long-term goals. And it's like, in my mind, if it were me, I would feel like, okay, my short-term goal is just to feel like I'm really functioning again, because like who knows how how my first pregnancy or whatever might go, and then what it's like to be a new mom, and then are there any complications after birth, and then it's like, okay, I just want to feel like my body's whole and ready to like start taking on load again and like actually rebuilding strength and all this stuff. um and then long term goal would be like getting back to ninja. Now everyone's gonna think I'm like trying to get pregnant right now. I'm not trying to get pregnant. That's not what this is
You
about.
have something you're keeping from us.
No, I promise. But yeah, like long term goal of like getting back to ninja. And so like for some people, it might seem like those things happen like bada boom, like really quickly, and then for others it might be like a year, or in your case, right, your first son, right, was a year and a half later, you said?
That I did that I did the show.
Ninja
So I
Warrior.
was doing some
Okay.
very high level activity before that, but
Right.
not as early as I was with my second.
Got it. Yeah, so I'm rambling. I don't know where I was going with this, but just like that whole concept of like your mindset of like what is truly short term versus long term goals. Yeah, that's what I was going for. Short term versus long term.
So yeah, short term versus long term goals I find are especially important for athletes during pregnancy, because what I see most often are not women that I have to convince to work out. There are women that don't want to take a step back. They want to do all the things that they used to do, and they get very frustrated like if they feel like they can't. And so that's where I really like to take a step back, because if you're thinking short term, like it's a little bit restrictive, because they're in the gym and they're like, well, am I allowed to still deadlift heavy, or am I not allowed? And if you're still deadlifting and it's lighter, they're comparing to how much they used to deadlift. Or like if you're in the ninja gym and you're like, well, should I be doing Lachey or should I not? Versus thinking, hey, after I have the baby, what I'd really like to get back to eventually is ninja. Right now, I'm 2.5 months pregnant. What can I do now that's going to support that goal down the road? Because I think that leads to making a lot better training decisions. And it also leads to, you just feeling better, because now it doesn't feel like all these things are being taken away from you. It feels like you're using your agency to make choices about what you want. And so, maybe doing intense lifting isn't right for you, or maybe now we're not doing things where we might fall because the baby's getting bigger. But rather than focusing on that, going, okay, well, I know that aerobic fitness is really good for pregnancy. Your blood volume goes up like close to 50%. So your heart's working a lot harder. So if you've never invested any time building up a little bit of an aerobic base, that can be done really safely during pregnancy. And that's going to help both your pregnancy, and it's going to help your recovery if you have this better aerobic base. And it'll help your ninja, because even though ninja is a lot of anaerobic energy system use, the better your aerobic system is, the less you have to dip into that anaerobic system that depletes faster. So that's something that I can do now that really supports my goals way down the road.
Wow, I would have never put that together in my own mind. Could you give us an example of that?
So what it would look like in training, or another?
Yeah.
So if so especially like first trimester is a good example. I have a client right now that, lifted very heavy, and she's just super tired, super nauseous, which is really normal first trimester. And so something that we're doing, again, rather than her focusing on the fact that she can't lift these weights right now because she's just tired, we're taking the time to practice some different breathing techniques, teaching her to engage her pelvic floor and integrate that with her breathing, some mobility work, which again, like then can translate to ninja later on, like if you need to do the splits to like get between two things. But so those things are going to help her get back to lifting postpartum, because she's put in that work now to learn about her body and teach her body how to engage in these different ways, which is going to fast track her after she has the baby. So now she doesn't feel like she's wasting time because she can't lift. She feels like she's making good use of that time.
Wow, yeah, that's excellent. And thank you for explaining that. That's really cool. Yeah, I guess let's jump now. I know we're jumping around a little bit, but let's kind of go back to, if you have had your baby and now you're looking to get back into training, what are some common struggles and like challenges that women do have post pregnancy that sometimes we think like, oh, like you had the baby, great, we're good to go. But like that's very, that's not really the reality. Like, what are a lot of
Yeah.
common things that women deal with as they get back after having a baby?
Yeah, there may be a few genetically lucky women that are just good to go, but that's not the story for a lot of us. Um, so a couple of common things to have some awareness around. The first one that I get asked out a lot is diastasis. And there's a lot of misconceptions about what it even is. So I'll take a little bit of time to describe it. So what a diastasis is, it's a separation of your rectus abdominis muscles. So if you look at somebody that has a very defined six-pack, that's your rectus abdominis. And if you look at them, there's kind of that line running vertically down the middle. And that's a line of connective tissue. It's called the linea alba. And so what happens during pregnancy is that linea alba has to stretch and thin, and the two sides of the rectus move apart to accommodate the baby. And then afterwards, ideally, they move back together.
Yeah, because I guess you don't usually see like a pregnant belly with like a six-pack on it, right?
No, well, your rectus, like the muscles themselves get stretched and like kind of smashed as well because they're like being pushed out around the baby. So all of the, which is another thing people forget about. They're like very fixated on the linea alba because they've heard about a diastasis, and they forget about the fact that all of the muscles and all of the connective tissue of your abdomen have to stretch really, really significantly to fit the baby in there. And, once the baby's out, that just doesn't magically go back overnight. Another really common misconception about diastasis is that like the distance between the two sides of your muscle should be 0. But you always have that band of connective tissue there. And so if you look at women that have never had a baby and you look like right above the belly button, which is the widest part typically, the average width there is about 1.3 centimeters, again, on a woman that's never had a baby. So all of women come to me postpartum and they're like, I have a finger width separation. And I'm like, no, that's totally normal. You're fine. And if you look at the, so women that have never had a baby, the 90th percentile is about a 2.2 centimeter distance between the two sides of the rectus abdominis. And so that 2.2 centimeters, or about 2 finger widths, is what they use as a cutoff typically for a diastasis. But what I think it's important for people to understand is that it's not like a black and white, I have a diastasis, I don't have a diastasis. It's this continuation of distance, and we have this cutoff somewhere that we call that. And then during pregnancy, everybody's going to technically have a diastasis because it has to stretch. Yeah. So if you look at someone that's 36 weeks pregnant, the average interrecti distance, so that average space between the two sides of the rectus abdominis, is about is really close to 7 centimeters. And so that's normal. That's very normal. That's the average amount. And almost nobody, like, to have like 2 or 3 centimeters at that point is very uncommon. And then if you look 6 weeks postpartum, that's when the biggest change happens, that first 6 weeks. And so 6 weeks postpartum, now our average distance is around 2.8. It's just under 3 centimeters. And so if you look at women at their 6-week checkup, 60% of women about are over that cutoff for a diastasis. And so now people's OBs are telling them, oh, you have a diastasis, and they're all afraid to work out, when in fact that's like totally normal to still have that amount of distance. And in fact, strengthening your abs is shown to help narrow it. And if you look at people that, don't do workouts, don't do any specific type of intervention, that sort of over time gradually comes back together until about a year postpartum, our average is around 2 centimeters or a little under. But again, those are averages. But just to give people an idea that it's totally normal to stretch, it comes back, and it may not come back to quite where it was before you had the baby, but you can be completely functional, you can be super strong, and still have like a quote unquote separation. Maybe that was a bit of a tangent, but I think it's really important for us to understand what it actually is, so there's less fear around it.
Yeah, no, I think that's an amazing explanation. I really appreciate that because, the way you explained it makes so much sense. And I think that does help calm people's fears of like, I have friends who are pregnant or who have had 2 or 3 kids at this point. And recently, just one of my friends was saying how she still has a diastasis and all this stuff. And I was like, I don't know anything about how to like tell you what to do because she's like looking to me for training help and I'm like I'm not qualified for that, but just to realize that it's not like something that happens to some people and not others. It's just like it happens to everyone and it's gonna it'll take its time coming back together. You can do things to like help yourself, but it's not like abnormal.
Exactly. And it's again like it's a continuation, but really severe diastases where they don't come back together at all, they're not common. They're not common. So if you look at a group of 100 women, it's like maybe 1%, and this is on a first baby, but about like 1% might have a more severe separation, like above 4 finger widths.
Mm-hmm. So kind of going back to like if you still have several finger width or like are concerned in some way or whatever the situation is, what would be an example of like when diastasis can be problematic? And then, or on the other side of that, just like what are things that we can be doing to like help strengthen our abs?
Yeah. So if you're, I wouldn't measure probably super early postpartum because you'll just freak yourself out. So wait a few weeks. And if you are over like 4 or 5 finger widths at like 6-week postpartum, it might be worth seeing a physical therapist. But if you're less, I would probably say, and if you don't know what to do, see somebody that's qualified. But kind of the basic idea is that we want to strengthen the abs. We want to put tension on that connective tissue to kind of signal it to help it regenerate. And we don't want to put a bunch of pressure on it that kind of pushes the abs wider. So what that would look like, let's say I'm trying to do a pull-up and I notice what's called coning. So if I'm doing a pull-up and I look down at my abs and I can kind of see this like Toblerone like running down where that connective tissue is pushing out, then that's a sign that maybe I'm not ready for that exercise. And so visually, that's kind of one of the biggest things that we look for is that coning thing. And maybe I'll shoot you a video just so people can visualize what it looks like. But if you do see that, it basically means you need to take a step back and find a version of the exercise that you can do where you don't see that. So if you're not ready to do a pull-up yet, you could try just doing a hollow hang and see if you can get a good contraction in that position where you don't see that combing. You may need to do like even an assisted hollow hang where you have your toes on the ground and you're just gently contracting your abs. And I'm using the hollow hang because I know that gymnasts do, I mean, not gymnasts, ninjas do a lot of hanging and swinging. And so you want, that's one of the positions that you're really going to want to make sure that you ramp yourself up on. So basically with each exercise, it's finding what level you are currently able to do with good engagement of all your abdominals, and then doing enough sets and reps to create a stimulus to get stronger. And so I do like to push that window of like what you can do, because if you're not doing enough, you're also not going to get stronger. You're not going to see much of a change if you're just doing really, really easy exercises for too long, which is what I did after my first. I was afraid of doing anything with my abs.
Could you describe a little bit then if the coning is a good warning sign of like maybe this is too much, back it up. What are we looking for then? Because some people intuitively know and others do not. So can you describe what more of like the flatter, controlled ab would look like? And we could probably find a video too, right? We could do that.
So if you again, if you imagine that kind of connective tissue, imagine somebody with a 6-pack, and you probably won't be able to see your 6-pack right after you have the baby. But if you go to crunch or go to do some sort of loaded ab exercise, what you'll see is that rather than your stomach kind of looking flat across, you'll see kind of like this mountain in the middle. It'll look like everything kind of bulges up in the middle. And I don't want people to be afraid, because if that happens a couple of times, like it's not like you're going to have any damage. I mean, the baby was in there stretching it here for 9 months. You're not going to explode. You're fine. But that exercise may be too advanced for you right now. And if you were to do a whole bunch of reps, tons and tons of reps, where you're basically still kind of pushing out, you're probably not going to see that gap close up.
That's good. No, that's a great explanation. Very helpful. Thank you. All right, so let's move on to another common one.
So another super common one is what's called stress urinary incontinence. And so that's basically leaking urine involuntarily, so when you don't want to. So this is really
Can't hold your
common.
pee.
Can't hold your pee, yeah.
Can't hold
And it
your
could be
pee.
just a
Yeah,
tiny
got
little
it.
bit, it could be more. Um, but you'll see it. So especially with, it's more common with a vaginal delivery. Um, Also can happen with a cesarean. It can happen during pregnancy because the end of pregnancy, when that baby is getting big and pushing down on your pelvic floor, um, a lot of women will have some leaking during pregnancy, like when they cough or they sneeze or they laugh. And then when we look at postpartum, again, you may have like a little bit of leaking during those things, or you might not. And then you go back to trying to do sort of more advanced activities that put a lot of demand on your pelvic floor. So, like running, jumping, um, landing, lifting anything really heavy. That puts a really high demand on your pelvic floor. And so they may start experiencing leaking then when they thought that they didn't have an issue. And so it's about 31% of women at 6 months postpartum will have some leaking. But I think if you look at high level activities, it's actually probably much higher because that's just an average population and a lot of them aren't even working out. Um,
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that this does happen to athletes in these high intensity sports, even if they're not pregnant. Because like I know it's a thing.
it
It's
is.
not
It is
like
absolutely
yeah.
no. So if you look at elite gymnasts, it's about 50% experience leaking. Um, and then if you look at like elite trampolinists, it's like 80.
Yeah,
And so it's really
don't be ashamed. Like it.
no, and it's
Yeah, don't.
I
Yeah.
really want to open up these conversations. And again, this one especially because it doesn't just apply to pregnant women. So like as a young gymnast, I would leak when I vaulted or I tumbled on floor, and I never told anybody because I was ashamed and I thought it was just me. Um, Find out years later, like, oh, like half the team. But um, and there's likely things that you can do for it. It may not be 100%, especially for like those super high demand activities. There may be this point that you know there may be things that you never quite get to the point that you don't leak a little bit. But for most women, we can see really big improvements, if not complete resolution.
Cool. There's hope for the
There's yeah.
leakage. Um, thank you. Yeah, I know there's a couple more we want to get into, but for that, is there? I'm wondering if maybe we'd have to record this separately, but I kind of forgot to say this earlier. For our Patreon listeners, we always have some sort of bonus content, and so I'm
Okay.
wondering if maybe in the bonus you could shoot a short video that's just kind of showing some examples of pelvic floor exercises and like what anyone could do now, if possible. You can think
Yeah,
through
and
that.
do those
What?
have like
Yeah.
videos with them? Because I have like a
Yeah.
pelvis
Oh
that
wow.
makes it. I have my little like demo pelvis with like a pelvic floor, so I can show people.
Nice. Yes. Yeah. It's video. We record it the exact same way. So yes.
Okay, yeah. But
We
absolutely, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah. Okay, anyways. So yeah, we will stick that in there. So Patreon listeners who get bonus content, you can get some real tangible examples of how you can fit this into your life now.
Like,
So
yeah.
awesome. Okay, so moving on. What are some other I know we have a list here. What are some other common struggles postpartum?
Um, yeah, so there's really probably two more that we'll talk about. So one is prolapse, and it's talked about less frequently. Um, and it's less common than incontinence, but a lot of women experience it to some degree. And so what that is you have your pelvic floor that's supporting your pelvic organs. So your bladder, your uterus, your rectum, all that's up there. And so um, what can happen through the stress to the pelvic floor with delivery, the stress of holding the baby up there, is that support of the pelvic floor and also kind of the connective tissue that help hold those organs in place can be decreased a little bit, and so you can experience some descent of the pelvic organs where they're kind of pushing in onto the vaginal canal. And so what that might feel like is it might feel like just this sensation of pressure down there. It could feel like you have a tampon in when you don't. It might just kind of feel like things are falling out. And in the really early postpartum stages, it's quite common. So I had some following my second, especially if I was walking around all day. Because a lot of times with a second kid, like you can't stay off of your feet like you can with the first. Um, and it's just kind of that gravity over time, it starts to be a little uncomfortable. And so it's just another symptom to be aware of, because if you do experience symptoms, you probably want to try to back off. And again, there's people that you can see to help do, physical therapy versus just like pushing through and maybe it gets worse. Because mine resolved within a couple of months, but maybe if I just decided to like go out and run sprints, jump on trampolines, you can end up with a recurrent problem.
Is there anything else that you wanted to share before we talk a little bit more about ninja specific training?
No, I think that those are the big ones. Women also sometimes experience like pain in like the pubic symphysis, so like where the pelvic bones come together in the front. But that's really more common during pregnancy, and usually it resolves postpartum on its own. So that's less of a postpartum one and more of a pregnancy one.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all those.
Yeah.
So much to look forward to.
I know it sounds so bad when you talk about it, but there's so many things that you can do though, which is why I want people to know.
Yeah, no, but that's exactly why we're having this conversation, because it can so easily feel like, oh gee. Like,
it can feel daunting. Yeah, you're like, oh no.
Yeah.
You're just scared if you don't know.
Yeah, but which is exactly why I wanted to have you on the podcast, because I was like, we need to talk about this stuff, and people need to not be afraid to like ask questions and ask what feels like dumb or scary questions.
Yeah. And there is no TMI. There's no TMI.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, so I know a lot of us are wondering, there might be moms listening who are like, I've tried to get back into Ninja and I'm struggling, or, I am getting back into Ninja, but how do I know if I'm making good progress? Or like, it can be hard to, it's already been a thing where I know a lot of the adults in Ninja now are feeling a little bit like, okay, there's a lot of teens in Ninja.
How do I keep up with the kids? Yeah.
How do I keep up with the teens? And like, I love our teens. You're all doing amazing, but it is making us feel like this need to step up our game, or just pressure of like, I can't compare myself to a 15-year-old on the course.
How do I compete anymore?
What I can do. Yeah, and so for moms in postpartum, it's like, maybe you're a couple months out or you're a couple years out and you're still in a place of struggle. So I guess my question is, do you have any sort of guidelines for women who are getting back into Ninja, or how would you help someone start to tackle that conversation of like, how do I get back into Ninja?
Yeah. Well, and first I want to clarify for a lot of the women that maybe haven't had babies yet, because a common fear I see going into pregnancy is that you're going to lose everything you worked so hard for. And that's completely not true. There will be specific rehab you need to do postpartum, but if you reached a certain level of strength one time, you're going to be able to get there much more quickly than somebody that has never been to that place. And you also don't lose all of your skills. So even if you put Ninja completely on the table for a few months or even a couple years, when you come back, you have that muscle memory. Once you build the strength back up, you're going to get those skills back very quickly. You might be a little bit rusty at first, but like I tried an aerial the other day and I literally have not done that since I was 16 years old. So it's been 21 years and I did it fine on the first try. So
amazing.
So your body remembers. It remembers really well. There's other stuff that I'm afraid I will never try again. But like I'm not going to do like a back handspring right now. I don't think my body bends that way anymore. But But your body remembers how to do these skills. Go ahead, sorry.
Right. Yeah, no, that's great. I was just going to jump in, and I'm wondering if this is quite similar, but I had shoulder surgery. And so I dislocated my shoulder. I was just completely out for like 2 months until I had the surgery, and that was another like 9 months of recovery.
Yeah.
And so I remember though being in PT, and once I was able to start, I had a great PT. I always rave about my PTs.
That's
but
good.
I had
it's important
true, like,
PT.
Yeah, I had true like sports specific PT that they knew exactly what my goals were. We were on the track towards Ninja. So as soon as I could, I was bringing my Ninja like Monstro holds like to PT.
Yep.
And before I was doing true pull-ups and things like that, I was still working with the grips, doing different things on like machines and like whatever, and then eventually working into assisted pull-ups, from like a, one of those giant like bands, the right word, I can't think, like the sports bands,
Yeah.
looped around the bar and just using grips, like doing everything to kind of like reacclimate myself. But there would be other people in PT like looking at me like, what is this girl doing? And once I was able to start doing pull-ups on the grips again, I was doing a lot of grip training while still like actively in PT like 3 days a week. And other people would watch and be like, wow, I've never been able to do that, and you're doing that like, however many months after surgery. But it's that same point of like, my body could do those before, and so getting back to it wasn't as hard as I originally thought it was going to be.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, so I was gonna say, I was wondering if it's a similar concept, like your body does go through, in a way, like a trauma, or like a huge change is happening to your body, but the muscle memory of it's not like every single muscle in your body was changed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You
It's like
you
you're
get
still
it back
able to go
sooner.
back.
Yeah, absolutely. So athletes, whether it's like you had a surgery or pregnancy, you will be able to ramp back up sooner, and your rehab exercises may look very different than somebody that was deconditioned going into pregnancy, which is a problem like that I think I had after my first pregnancy. Rehabbing my core was I was doing all these super, super regressed exercises. And if you look at an athlete my level, like they weren't doing anything. They weren't sufficient to create a stimulus because they were way too easy. Um, and so coming back, yes, you'll be able to ramp up much sooner. And if you do work with a PT, make sure that it's one that works with athletes, because um, they need to know that you're not here. They need to give you a sufficient level of challenge. But like for my submission video last time, I did a pull up holding both of my kids, which is about 60 pounds. And that was at about 6 months postpartum, which, like, I mean, that's a pretty decent level of strength. And that's not because I followed this magical program postpartum. It's because I had that strength before I went in. And so you don't lose all that. You don't lose it. It might feel briefly like you're not yourself postpartum. It feels a little bit weird. You're like, I can't even sit up in bed. Not because I don't think I should. I literally can't. Um, but it does come up back very, very quickly. Um,
Yeah. So getting back into, are there any other like general guidelines that you might have for ninjas who are trying to figure out like
how to get back
finding
into
my
it?
footing? Yeah.
Yeah, so my first one would be, especially during pregnancy, once you are kind of, because ninja realistically during pregnancy isn't going to be appropriate at a certain point, certainly anything where you might fall. And also even like hanging and pull-ups, at a certain point, that's a lot of pressure on your core. We don't think of it as a core exercise, but it really is. And so if you see that coning during pregnancy also, that's probably a sign that, it might be time to retire that movement. And so during pregnancy, I really didn't do much ninja, but you can strength train in a way that supports ninja. And so, like you were saying with your holds after your shoulder surgery, um, hanging is a lot of on the core. But if you then put your feet up on something where you're just like at an angle, then you can hold on and still work your grip in a way that's not as demanding on your abs. You can still work pull-ups, or you could do like TRX rows, or I did like assisted just with my feet on the floor because it's not the same demand on your abs, but you can still keep your arms strong. And so kind of using that same thing as you build back up postpartum, investing your time in doing progressive strength training versus jumping right back into ninja. So getting the strength to do those skills first versus trying to gain the strength through the skills, because you're going to find that you have gaps and you're like, wait, hold on. I thought I could do a pullover, but I literally can't. What do I do now? And so starting very basic at the beginning, I did a lot of focused core work. At first it looked, super basic, like literally on the ground, like contracting without lifting anything up, basically.
Yeah.
Like literally trying to shorten your abs into their normal position and get a contraction at all is like where you start. But then as you're ready, a few weeks postpartum, then I was hanging and working on getting that contraction again without the doming. And then I was doing assisted pull-ups. And so spending time doing kind of that slow strength training. Um, and also, same thing with like getting back to the jumping. So before you just go straight into going for a jog, um, you probably want to do some strengthening of your legs, and specifically like glutes, hamstrings, so everything around your pelvis that kind of got affected by pregnancy, but that all helps stabilize. And so if it's weak and you're just going for a jog, now your pelvic floor and everything else is taking more pressure because your muscles aren't absorbing that impact. So, just doing, like, I did a lot of like Bulgarian split squats. I do a lot of single leg exercises because I prefer them over bilateral. And it's less intra-abdominal pressure postpartum, which is something else we can go into a different point. But again, just finding where you are and then doing progressive strength exercises to get to a point that you can do the ninja versus just like walking into the gym one day and trying to do sort of a regressed version of ninja, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's great advice, honestly, for anyone who's either just getting into ninja for the first time or coming to ninja after an injury or just after any amount of time off. Because I do think, this is my personal opinion, I think that ninja too often focuses on the end result of the skill we're trying to achieve and doesn't think about the foundation of strength that it takes to do all those skills safely and for a long time, like not just once, but like continually.
That's what I've observed with ninja in general as well. It's like strength and conditioning, like the science hasn't made it to ninja yet. It's just like people just keep doing more ninja and more ninja and more ninja versus, focusing on specific attributes outside of ninja, building that and then integrating it in. But that's a whole nother conversation.
I know. And people, if people know me personally, like outside of this podcast, I literally talk about this all the time because especially like for me, it was bashed into my mind how important this is after I had a really traumatic injury. Yeah. And I don't want other people to have to wait to like really hurt themselves. To really hurt themselves to have to then figure out, oh, I was missing something. Like there's ninja's a really intense sport and I think we forget, like, it's so fun, it's so awesome, but it's also very intense on your body. So I appreciate everything you're explaining. Well, Amy, is there any last words you wanted to give before we kind of end up our episode for today? I know we've shared so much great information and probably a lot of people are wondering like, wait, you didn't really talk about like this or that. Like we will be talking more in another episode and we also would love to hear your questions. So if you are a mom or if you're hoping to be a mom in the future or whatever your case may be, if you have a question related to this topic, please DM us. Let us know what you're thinking. We would love to cover more information in the next episode. And so, Amy, is there any last words? And then also, if people would like to contact you personally about training or about like, I am that mom who needs your help, like, can they contact you? And what would that look like?
Okay. Last words, really just the biggest thing, especially to, maybe the ninjas that are looking forward to that pregnancy like you, is, don't be afraid. You will absolutely be able to get back to it. Especially, if you don't feel comfortable, you don't know what you're doing, get some help. But if you want to continue to compete in ninja after you have a baby, you absolutely can. It's doable. Just to put that out there. If you don't want to, that's fine. But if you do, it's absolutely possible. And then, as far as contacting me, I am not super active on Instagram, but I am on there. And so the easiest way to get a hold of me is to just message me on Instagram. So I'm Amy Harski on there. That's AMYHARSKI. So that's probably the easiest spot.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, everyone who's listening, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you would like to view our bonus content, if you're a Patreon subscriber, you can do that in just a moment here. We're actually going to be recording some practical exercises that you can do for pelvic floor strengthening. And Amy is going to get all sciencey on us. I can't wait for this. She just told me that she has to find her pelvis before we can do this part of the video. So
my extra pelvis, not the one in my body.
So anyways, if you would like to be a Patreon subscriber, if you're like, how can I view this content? You'll have to head on to patreon.com/Ninjababes, and there you will see a variety of ways that you can support the Ninjababes podcast, and a bunch of those tiers include the bonus content. So on Patreon is where you view the bonus content. It's all on Patreon via our YouTube channel. So thank you so much for listening. We're gonna check out for today for our regular listeners, so thank you, and we'll say goodbye now. So thanks, Amy.
Thank you.